Hi, this is Ben Pettit, Reverend Benjamin Pettit. I'm an evangelist in Church of Nazarene. In case this is your first visit on my videos, I want you to see, here's my oldest daughter, Madison Taylor, and she's with me. And we're back in Kalamazoo. Our last video was taped in Texas about 3 weeks ago. But tonight I want to share with you one of the more important ideas, and that is about the main thesis of my second book, which really is one of the most important things that I'm going to share with you about. It's called The Holy Remnant, and it's called Warnings from the Past. And the idea is that in this book, I make a contention for the thought that the American Holiness movement, which is the parent movement out of which the Church of Nazarene came, which is the church I'm a member of, and I said that basically it was a result of, and I call it a countermeasure balance, but I mean a result of the liberal movement that started in England and came over here. Started in Europe and came over here to America roughly around the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. And so I said that the holiness movement was a countermeasure to the gradual wave, which was started with the teaching of Darwin of evolution, and that is what the holiness movement is. So I want to expand that idea that when they were coming out of Methodism, to become American Holiness movement personages, they weren't just come-outers out of the Methodist Church. They're come-outers from the liberal wave that was hitting all of America at the time. Well, that has been very clearly stated in my book. It's been clearly stated in my Waiting School 4 all the way till now, and we're on Waiting School 38 teachings. And so I want you to see something, though. In our most recent history, written by Floyd, Floyd, I think his last name is Cunningham, and then the other authors that were with him. It's called Our Watchword and Song. In that book, it says the exact opposite. Somewhere in about the range of about the 200s and 300s, the book states, and I'll show you it later. I'll show you the exact quote, but it states that that the Church of Nazarene. So now it's talking about the daughter of the American Holiness movement. And it says, was not formed as a result of coming out from modernism or liberalism. So it contends for the exact opposite. Matter of fact, one of the pet peeves of the author all the way through the book is the idea of the fundamentalist leavening of the American Holiness movement. He doesn't like that they were conservative that much. He wants to be somewhere in the middle about the idea of creation, about the idea of the end times view of pre-tribulation, pre-rapture, pre-tribulation rapture and premillennial viewpoint. He wants to, kind of come against that through the whole book. So he's saying the exact opposite. Well, I want you to hear the author in this book. This is called A Theological Transition in American Methodism, and it's a very famous book among Wesleyan scholars by Robert E. Childs. And the book was written about Methodists and Methodism changing away from John Wesley's stance on Scripture, on different things like that, underneath three major thinkers in Methodism, starting at that time. Okay, so he's developing the wave for me, and I use that in my book, and so did Dr. Metz in a book for the Church of Nazarene called, talking about what the Church of Nazarene needs to believe. It says concerning issues in the Church of Nazarene. Well, listen to this statement. He says the same thing. It's more written in theological jargon, but I want you to hear it. He says on page 69 of his book, it should not be supposed that Methodists were of one mind in accepting all these changes. So he's talking about, he just listed all the liberal changes that were happening after the wave of evolution and all its teaching. He says a sizable and potent group opposed both the dynamic forces of the New World and the attempts of the liberals to reconstruct a theology relevant to them. The opposition existed. Where does it exist? In the holiness movement, which expanded in the last half of the 19th century. It drew most of its strength from Methodism, in which the stress on a second blessing had become increasingly unpalatable. If you want to see how increasingly unpalatable it was, read Timothy Smith's work on the history of the Church of the Nazarene, because he'll tell you that they were literally taking ministerial credentials away, and on it goes. But we weren't just coming out from the resistance to the idea of instantaneous entire sanctification. That was what we were coming out from. But we're coming out from a whole movement of liberals across the board that were influencing all the major Methodist schools, all the major Methodist thinkers, and it influenced early on our new theology by Cunningham. By Floyd Cunningham says the same thing. He even lists how Wiley was a catalyst to bring in the thought of Albert Knudsen, personalism, which is a liberal theology philosophy that was meshed into Methodism at that point, and how he brought that into our church, and it influenced on down, it trickled on down through our church in the early years. And so you can see that this is something you can't just excuse away. Liberalism was majorly impacting the church, the Methodist Church, and that's why we came out. That's why we exist. That's why the Nazarene Church exists. It exists to stand for the fundamental truths of Scripture. Okay, whether we like it or not, creationism, the strict points that our church was founded on. You can even hear pre-tribulation, premillennial viewpoint, even in the article today. You can hear inerrancy in our article today. You can tell that our stand, I mean, as Paul Bassett proved, was a fundamentalist stand, not a liberal, not a modernistic, but definitely more toward, I mean, they were literally at General Assemblies saying there's not a modernist here, there's not a liberal here, we are fundamentalists. And so you can hear that the Church of Nazarene was majorly swayed away from that movement. That's the gradualism I'm talking about. That's why they had to put a counter emphasis on the crisis aspect, because it was disappearing, and God justified it. God put his okay on it, thus the holiness movement. So I stand with my scholars. There are those that oppose, but you can hear that it's more historically true. Read A.M. Hill's theology, see how he devotes about 70 pages to all the schools and how they're being overwhelmed by this new liberal wave. Read L.L. Pickett's book on End Times with Andrew Johnson, and hear how he's telling you that this liberal wave's hit all the Methodist schools, and you'll see the evidence as it's everywhere. Thank you.